That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
You know, so it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to Politbrawl News. My name is Brian, and Josh Hawley absolutely roasts the president of the NCAA because this dude doesn't understand the differences between men and women. Let's dive in.
Did you say the federal law requires the NCAA to permit biological men to play in women's sports?
No, I said there have been 5 cases in federal court in the past 18 months. And
okay, because I thought you told him that
federal judges sided with participation.
The reason the NCAA couldn't take a position on this, in fact, you have taken a position on it. You're affirmatively permitting biological men in women's sports. But you said to him it's because of federal law. There's no federal law that requires it, right? The relevant federal law is Title IX, is it not? You're familiar with Title IX.
If guidance on this issue from Title IX or guidance with respect to discrimination law would be
Title
important.
IX is already the law. Title IX says
federal judges have ruled on
this. It's 20 U.S.C. Section 1681A. By the way, let's just dispense with that canard. No federal court has ordered the NCAA to include biological men in women's sports, right?
Actually,
there's not a single case that has ordered the NCAA to do so, correct?
That's pretty much what they decided in the San
No, don't
Jose
say pretty
case.
much. We're talking about the law here.
Yes,
I know. And you actively dissembled to Senator Kennedy just a second ago. It's not true that the NCAA has been ordered by any court, number one. It's not true that federal law requires you to include biological males. In fact, Title IX explicitly says no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be denied the benefits of any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. You are in court at this moment arguing that Title IX doesn't apply to the NCAA, which is astounding to me, given the amount of money, federal money, the NCAA gets. But let me just ask you this. A total of 5 teams, 5 women's volleyball teams, Wyoming, Southern Utah, Utah State, Nevada, and Boise State all had to forfeit 7 games in their conference play, NCAA conference play this past year, women's teams, because a biological male, under your rules, was playing on a rival's team. How is that not denying them the benefits of the sport? Why is this fair to women?
And when that issue went to federal court, the judge sided with participation.
No, the NCAA did not go to court.
No,
that is not true.
The federal judge made the decision with respect to the issue you just raised.
Your rules have not been tried in federal court. And your rules explicitly permit biological males in women's sports. And I am asking you, why is that fair to the women? All of these women on these teams had to forfeit games and therefore a chance to compete in the championship because of your rules. And I want to know, why is that protective of women? That's my question.
So far, the federal government on the court side has issued decisions several times.
No, I'm not asking you about the
year.
courts. I know what the courts have done. Not one of them has
their
ordered the
interpretation
NCAA.
of federal law.
This is your policy, which you will not defend because, frankly, it's indefensible. Why are you, Mr. Baker, why are you allowing biological men to play in women's sports?
Because we believe that's consistent with federal policy.
So we're right back to your testimony is you believe you're compelled to do it by federal law. You would change it otherwise?
We believe our policy. I said in my opening comments to Senator Kennedy, the clarity on this issue at the federal level would be very helpful.
Oh, that is such a cop-out. In other words, somebody else please do it for us. Keep sending us the money. We'll go to court and argue that Title IX doesn't even apply to us.
We do not take a dime in federal money, not a dime.
Is that why you're arguing Title IX doesn't apply to you?
No, yes, part of it, yes.
You honestly think you shouldn't be subject to Title IX?
We don't believe we currently are in federal court.
Amazing.
Federal court has affirmed
Absolutely
that on a number
amazing.
Of
You have a pending lawsuit right now from female athletes who are suing you because you allow biological men not only in their sports, but also in their locker rooms. Why do you do that, by the way? Why do your guidelines allow biological men into women's locker rooms without the women's consent? Without the women's foreknowledge? Why do you do that?
That's not what our guidelines say.
They do say that. I've got them right here. Your guidelines say that transgender student athletes should be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet facilities in accordance with their gender identity. And here they are, right here.
And then everybody else should have an opportunity to use other facilities if they wish to do so.
Okay, so the burden's on the women. So if the women then want to move to a different facility, in other words, if they want to abandon their own locker room, you're saying that they should have to do that? So in other words, it's their problem?
No, we put a significant amount of emphasis on what the locals' plans are, and we make sure that everybody.
What does that mean, the locals' plans?
Whoever it is that's hosting the event.
You have guidelines that instruct them what the best practices are, and your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all, correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities. And many,
what does that even mean? Optionality. What it says is transgender student athletes will be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet in accordance with their gender identity. That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
You know, so it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous.
Well, of course it's outrageous. This is the president of the NCAA. He's not Roger Goodell. All right, he's not smart enough to know how to craft storylines and make sure that the NFL is the same version as the WWE, okay? This guy isn't quite in the same league because collegiate sports is this weird, for lack of a better word, just mess. All right, collegiate sports are a mess, particularly when it comes to football. And after the recent Supreme Court ruling just a few years ago that the collegiate athletes can sell their likenesses. Now, while that's the smart decision, what that ultimately created is this weird transfer portal that is ruining college sports as we know it. So that's another whole can of worms, but what I'm trying to point out here is this guy is not Roger Goodell, okay? Roger Goodell, unlike like the NFL, is smart enough to understand what makes money. This guy doesn't understand that. And he's here in the Senate committee meeting, just with his head in his hand, just looking at you like this, like, I'm too bored to be here. Yawn. You bore me. Let's move along. That's the attitude this guy has. That's not just in his body language. I can guarantee you that he thinks that he's better than the senators that were elected by the people. And so what's really going on here is a dude that is in charge of hundreds of schools and hundreds of collegiate programs, and he's receiving federal money hand over fist, and he says, you know what? I'm not going to have the stones to step out and say, you know what? We need to bring up a lawsuit against the transgender policy in our collegiate sports. This is a legitimate problem. And I bring this up over and over and over again. But even Serena Williams, who is the premier tennis star in women's sports, and she even admits herself that she can't compete against some of the more shaky male opponents. There was back in the 80s, something called the Battle of the Sexes, when tennis's biggest mouth, for lack of a better word, I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head, but he went up against the number one female tennis star, and he just shellacked her. Okay? That's an okay thing to admit, that women and men are different when it comes to basic biology. You'd think if you went to college, you would take either a basic chemistry or biology class. In chemistry, you would know the little atoms that make up our endocrines and make up our endorphins and make up the little chemicals that cause men to have more testosterone and cause women to have more estrogen. That's an okay thing to admit. But this head of the NCAA doesn't have the guts to go out on a limb and say, yes, there are differences between men and women, and we need to treat that accordingly. He said, you know what, I'm going to wash my hands of this. Let's get this up to the states. Let's get this up to the colleges. And instead of providing for women's sports, which is quite literally subsidized by all the male sports, let's protect them because women deserve their ability to compete. The just, sad reality is we don't all look at that competition and say they're equal. The average person, you, me, this entire audience, understand that there's a difference. Okay? We're smart enough to understand that. But this head of the NCAA clearly doesn't. And Josh Hawley is simply questioning, why do we give you money at all? This guy doesn't have the guts to go out on a limb and say the truth, and instead just says, we're going to let everyone else take care of that. I think it's time for new blood in the NCAA, and my personal opinion is we get sports out of the colleges, but that's a little extreme for a lot of people, particularly for a Georgia boy. I know that there's a lot of people that would be heartbroken if the University of Georgia stopped having collegiate sports. So that's a whole nother issue for another day, but let me know how you would deal with this down in the comments below, because this is a simple issue. Don't let men compete in women's spaces. You think it's that simple, but the president of the NCAA, which takes your tax dollars, doesn't have the guts to address it. And Josh Hawley is calling him out, and rightly so. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed this segment on Politibrawl News. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. And until then, y'all have a good one.